Hi, everybody. I thought I'd do a Gurdjieff show. It's been a while since I've done one. So today I thought I would talk about mentation, thinking, thinking in form. We all have to think. Are we thinking with our higher selves, or are we thinking in lower types of ways? And I was going to start with a quite long Gurdjieff quote, but I'm going to do bits and pieces with it. So this is from All and Everything. And this is pages 15 and 16. And he says, man has in general two kinds of mentation. One kind, mentation by thought, in which words, always possessing a relative sense, are employed. And the other kind, which is proper to all animals as well as to man, which I would call mentation by form. And I used to get quite confused about all this. Which way am I thinking? Am I thinking mentation by form, or am I thinking, in a higher way, or am I just stuck in thought? And our thoughts do fly at us, don't they? Sometimes we wonder where they come from. Is it the ghost in the machine, as they say? Is it dark forces putting thoughts into our minds? Is it angels putting thoughts into our minds? Where do thoughts come from? And it's something I ponder on quite a bit. And Gurdjieff talks a lot about pondering. And I'm going to come back to that again later in the show, hopefully, if I remember. The second kind of mentation, by which strictly speaking, the exact sense of all writing must be also perceived, and after conscious confrontation with information already possessed, be assimilated, is formed in people in dependence upon the conditions of geographical locality, climate, time, and in general upon the whole environment in which the arising of the given man has proceeded, and in which his existence has flowed up to manhood. Now, we're living in a multicultural world these days. We like to think everyone thinks the same, but we don't. And I have this my own experience with people that I know from other continents and other countries. I see they don't think perhaps in the same way as I do with my English way of thinking. And it must have been quite difficult for people over, in the first years of all this multicultural movement around the world, of people were expecting people to act like they do in their country when they come visiting. But then when we look back over the past of millennia, people have been moving and traveling around all the time and probably influencing each other's thoughts and thinking formations. That we know that the Italians think in one way, the Nordic think in a different way. The Aussies down on the other side of the world, they must think in another way. And you probably, if you've been traveling or live in other countries that are not from where you're from, that are quite different from your own upbringing, you sometimes find the way that person from the country you're staying in thinks is slightly different to how you think. And we are influenced, obviously, by the culture that we're brought up in. And I wonder, with it now becoming more and more of a multicultural world in cities, maybe the way people will think in the future will be not mattering what race they're from, but if they're born into a city that their parents have moved to that isn't their original city, maybe over time, all these different cultures will begin to think kind of alike. And it still means out in the country, people will think in their own ways, because maybe there's not so much multicultural mixing going on. Let me continue. Accordingly, in the brains of people of different races and conditions dwelling in different geographical localities, there are formed about one and the same thing or even idea a number of quite independent forms, which during functioning, that is to say association, evoke in their being some sensation or other which objectively conditions a definite picturing, and which picturing is expressed by this, that, or the other word that serves only for its outer subjective expression. That is why each word for the same thing or idea almost always acquires for people of different geographical locality and race a very definite and entirely different, so to say, inner content. So I'm thinking Gurdjieff saying there what I've just sort of said, but in a much more, obviously, his way of saying it. People are thinking differently from different continents and different geographical locations. And even obviously through different ages, different generations think differently. You know, the older generation always despair at the younger generation and their silly ideas, while the younger generation are always despairing at the older generation and their outdated ideas to them. But with doing the Gurdjieff work, we're learning to be aware of other people's mentation and formation of mentation, whilst at the same time being aware of our own mentation and how we're acting, thinking in situations. And like I was saying earlier, thoughts just come flying in. We get easily distracted. We think we're trying to concentrate on something and suddenly realize we're thinking about something else. One example, obviously for those that meditate, it's quite difficult to clear one's mind. We're supposed to be emptying it when we're meditating so that we can let the higher forces come down into us, which is why all the teachings talk about, you're not stopping thinking, you're just letting it go by, not getting attached to it, not clinging on to some thought that flies by and you suddenly, it's trying to distract you from what you're doing. And as we know, many of us know, when we're going to sleep, we have all these strange thoughts of things that we hadn't thought about for ages, or were worrying us, or, normally quite negative thoughts come up to us. I'm not worthy, and that kind of thing. We're all worthy. Like our thoughts seem to play tricks on us, don't they? And I think that Gurdjieff is trying to encourage us to understand what the thought process is, what it is we're thinking about, why we're thinking about it, always important for why. Why has that thought suddenly come into my mind? Sometimes it might be because it's warning you of something or reminding you of something that needs to be done. Well, good, okay, if it's helping you, we sometimes get thoughts to remind us to, oh yes, we're supposed to go and do that at 12 o'clock or whatever. Sometimes we have thoughts that come in that distract us, but sometimes thoughts come in because we've seen something. For example, we've gone into a cafe and we've seen a vase of flowers, and there are certain type of flowers. And as soon as you've seen that vase of flowers, it reminds you of somebody who gave you flowers like that many years ago, and there was some kind of incident with it or whatever. So immediately then thought processes from the past are coming in onto that thought process that's dealing with a vase of flowers that you're seeing in the now. And by doing the Gurdjieff work, we learn not to let them kind of associations distract us or interfere with the thought process you're having at that moment. We have associations to things that disrupt what happens when we come into contact with other things that are like it. Like with that, going into that cafe and seeing that vase of them flowers should be a whole new moment in your life. It's a completely different set of flowers and vase from the one that happened, in the past when you had the incident with it, whatever that is. This is just an analogy, of course. And by working on our thought processes, we can tell ourselves, right, that's not the same vase, it's not the same flowers, this is a different moment. The same thing is not going to happen again. But in the back of our mind, there's that little niggling of, oh, do you remember when that happened? Which is why we have to work on our thought processes and be aware of what's happening. It's, part of the watching ourselves and identifying what our different eyes are doing to us. But Gurdjieff goes on later on in All and Everything about mentation. So this is in the pages 1056 and 57. So it's Hussein, he's talking to his grandfather, Beelzebub, and asking, why are people being like they are? And Gurdjieff reminds us that, of course, they ponder, meaning us. Of course, they see. A number of them do ponder, even very often. And in spite of the automaticity of their reason, they fully understand that this particularity of theirs, namely their predisposition to periodic reciprocal destruction, is such an unimaginable horror and such a hideousness that no name can ever be found for it. So he's talking about death and happening here. It happens to people, but he's talking also about people pondering, and that we have this automaticity of our reason. You know, it's very automatic, isn't it? It tries to be very rational, our reason. And as we are aware, as we do this kind of work, life is not that rational, but we need rational ways of thinking in certain situations. And it all comes back to doing the having all your three centers harmonized. You know, you've got to look at your emotional feeling at that time, what your rational thinking is thinking, or your intellect is trying to think at that time, and what your body's doing. You know, is it all tense up or is it relaxed? You know, and all this. It's quite a lot to try and ponder and keep going all at the same time. For example, for me here doing these shows, you know, I try and concentrate that my body is relaxed while I'm doing it, because then hopefully things will flow. Though I know things don't always. I know I jibber jabber all the time. I know my mind's racing constantly. Say this, say this, say this. Or maybe I'd get a little distracted by something that's going on in this house. And then my emotions are gurgling up and down. Sometimes they're saying to me, "You're not worthy to do this. You can't do these shows." And another time it's like, "Yeah, you can do this." You know, sometimes they're encouraging, sometimes they're putting down, but it shows that we're different all the time. But it's being aware of what's we're being like at that time. And in a way, it is a control thing, but we can't control it. So that's why we observe it and see what's happening to us. And by observing it, it kind of retreats, and instead you have suddenly, it's like it's oh, I've been seen, I've been spotted at what I'm doing. And it tries to recollect itself. And sometimes, hopefully all the time, the right way of thinking comes in, or the right way of feeling takes over, or the right way of your body suddenly goes, "No, I need to be more whatever it is," you know, like, "I've got to stay relaxed, don't tense up." Obviously there are times when we need to tense up and do things. You know, like doing these kind of shows, and I'm sure you've had it when you're in put on the spot in front of people, or feel like you're trying to put something forward. You get all hot, flustered, perhaps, you know, your skin starts crawling or whatever. But being aware of that happening helps one to settle into the situation. But let me continue with all and everything. Yet, unfortunately, this is Beelzebub speaking. From this pondering of these free brain beings there, no sense at all is ever obtained. And no sense is ever obtained, partly because only isolated beings there ponder over this matter, and partly thanks to the absence there, as is usual, of one common planetary organization for a single line of action. And therefore, if ever the mentioned isolated beings ponder over this question and can state something sensible about this horror, then this constating of theirs is never widely spread and fails to penetrate into the consciousness of other beings. So as I was saying, they were talking about death here, reciprocal destruction and people killing each other. But that can apply to anything, like even just trying to help people to awaken, or help people to think in a more conscious, evolved way. We're trying to do this and put this forward, and hopefully it would encourage other people to be like that. But some people start thinking far too much on it and pondering far too much. And then, you know, there's a single line of action, as he says, but do they continue with that action? This is all part of like the Enneagram that I recently did another show with on Tony Blake's channel. The Enneagram's going round, it's moving, we're going along in that line of action, and something comes along and pushes it, whether we continue on that way or we give up. And I find that a lot with people in the work when they're starting out, all eager, 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 going forward, going forward, going forward. And then something comes along that stops them in their tracks. And they either don't continue with the work, or it makes them see it in a different way. And then they do continue and they're going on to the next trajectory of it. But that can be applied to everything in life with the Enneagram. How many things have you started and something's happened and you've stopped because something's knocked it off course? Do you continue or do you persevere and see whether it... Well, there are two shocks in the Enneagram, because then you can persevere, continue, hopefully making things better, and then another shock comes along that should lift you up even further. Or sometimes that second shock can come along because you haven't been doing anything and it gets you back on track. And I do find that with the Gurdjieff work, people come and go in it quite a lot. Not many stick to it continuously. They go away for a few months and perhaps come back to it, which is fine, because during them few months, hopefully your inner self is pondering on all this and making it all work. So Gurdjieff goes on to say, where was I? So people are doing, they should be doing sincere pondering. That's one of the things he's encouraging us all to do. You know, we want to be sincere in this work and sincere in ourselves and sincere in what we're pondering and thinking about. What is our mentation doing? And he says, and in addition, it is very sad about this sincere pondering of the beings upon similar questions. I must tell you that thanks to the abnormally established conditions of being existence there, the waking psyche, as it is expressed there, of each one of them gradually becomes from the very beginning of responsible existence such that he can think sincerely and see things in the true light exclusively only if his stomach is so full of first being food that it is impossible for what are called wandering nerves in it to move, or as they themselves say, he is stuffed quite full. And besides all his needs already inherent in him, which are unbecoming to free brain beings, and which have become the dominant factors for the whole of his presence, are fully satisfied, of course, only for that given moment. And he goes on to talk about, where is it? And as owing to those same wrongly established conditions there, not all the beings had the possibility of becoming thus satisfied. Then, on this account, and for many other reasons, most of them, even with their full desire, can neither think sincerely nor see and sense reality, and therefore sincere thinking and the sensing of reality have already long ago become a very rare luxury on this planet of yours, and inaccessible to most of them. You know, and sadly, that is what's going on with the world, with the people that don't want to wake up or have no inclination to. They think they're awake. You know, we're waking up, and hopefully we can help others wake up that want to. And that's a very important criteria of this kind of work. People must want to do it. If they don't want to do it, it's no point going and trying to wake them up. They're too stuck in their old ways and content in their sleepy life, though they think they're awake and conscious, don't they? But the sincere thinking and the sense of reality, sensing of reality, that's what we're working towards. Sincere thinking and sensing of reality. Now, I wanted to do some quotes from Beelzebub's Tales about mentation. Why are we doing this? And he reminds us that we're doing this to actively mentate about such essence questions. We're really got to find the questions that help feed our essence and ourselves, and not just the ones that don't really help us develop, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. I had a better word for it earlier, now I've forgotten it. But that's all the thing of just doing this. So sometimes I think I should write down what I want and just read it out, but I quite like the challenge of doing it this way. And he reminds us that when we want to set out with an aim to mentation, he says, a man who has in general set himself the aim to mentate actively impartially. And I've done shows on being impartial. It is an important part of it all. This development of ourselves will teach us to be impartial. And that's a much more balanced way of being, of seeing all sides, the whole story, everything that's going on. Gives you a much better understanding of life in the universe. And Gurdjieff writes in All and Everything, the active mentation is a being, and the useful results of such active mentation are in reality actualized exclusively only with the equal degree functioning of all his free localizations of the results spiritualized in his presence, called thinking center, feeling center, and moving motor center, which I was talking about earlier. We need to get all three in harmony. And that gives us real mentation, real ways of thinking, and true understanding. He also calls it, was it reason of knowing? It must be reason of understanding, because with knowledge develops the understanding that turns into wisdom. All these people that keep telling me, I've got the knowledge. You don't need just the knowledge, you need to develop it and make it wisdom to help you use it wisely. It's no good being a smarty pants that knows the answers to everything. And if you don't know how to use that knowledge to, knowing the answers is one thing. It's dealing with situations and what them answers need doing with, we need wisdom and common sense. And I've said before, common sense isn't very common, but common sense comes with this kind of work. It develops in us. And Gurdjieff reminds us, in every free brain being, there can be crystallized data for three independent kinds of being mentation, the totality of the engendered results of which expresses the gradation of his reason. And reason's such an important part of all this. We have to, I know everybody goes on about rationality, but we need to understand the reason for things and what reason is. And let me just find, I had a reason is, or more exactly, the totality of self-awareness. So he's talking about reason in a different way to what's used in, like, average everyday talk or in the dictionaries and such like. He's given it the meaning that it's a true understanding of ourselves, the totality of self-awareness, which is what we're trying to be, self-aware. We don't want to be without any reason, totally absent of any reason at all. We need reasons to help us reason our way through life. And he talks about gradation of reason. Everybody's got it at different degrees because it's all down to how their centers are running and whether they're using all their centers or just walking about sleepified. Then your gradation of reason will be much lower than someone who's more awake or waking up, who will be developing their grades of reason to be able to see more and more of what's really going on in themselves and in the outside world. And he talks about three kinds of being reason: pure or objective, and automatic functioning. And then I forgot to write down what that meant. But, objective, we all know, is being, it's the opposite of subjective. It's not just about yourself. It's about the whole objective of everything. And pure reasoning, surely that's got to be a connection with the divine in some way. And automatic functioning, most of the sleepy people do that. We need an automatic functioning to keep our own bodies going, to help us breathe in. And, as we walk, we're not thinking about how we're walking or how to do that. That's an automatic functioning. And he also calls objective reason, I found my notes, divine reason. So this is also pure reason. And that is obviously a connection to his endlessness, as Gurdjieff calls him, the divine source, whatever you name, the God above all gods, the creator of all, that, is indescribable, really. and that our connection to that is through our conscience. But by going into that connection and being a part of that path or that stream, our reason will develop to a more objective and pure reason over time. Objective reason, which should be in the common presences of free-brained beings of all natures and of all external forms, and which in itself is nothing else but, so to say, the representative of the very essence of divinity. The perfecting of objective reason can proceed in them only from personal conscious labours and intentional sufferings. So once again, it's kind of all down to accumulating knowledge, turning it into wisdom, and developing that. Well, by developing that, we will start developing an impartiality way of thinking and reasoning, which would make us hopefully more wholesome. I might leave it there, otherwise I might just start waffling. But anyway, thanks for watching. Keep on pondering and developing yourselves, and I look forward to next time.